Millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people.
You cannot shake hands with a clenched fist.
Produced by a nuclear exchange would be carried by wind and water and soil and seed to the far corners of
the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
We're not saying that planet Earth is coming to an end. We're saying that planet Earth is about to be refurbished, spaded under, and have another chance to serve as a garden for another civilization.
Most of the people in here are just your reflections. They're your mistakes.
1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
1 million of the planet's 8 million species are threatened.
You are what you repeatedly do. Therefore, excellence ought to be a habit, not an act.
Your lives and the credibility of the United Nations is at stake.
Epstein didn't kill himself.
The reason this is such an interesting time is not only because we're on the threshold of the end of this civilization.
They're trying to take you out with bullshit.
The experience of the past 2 years has proven beyond doubt that no nation can appease the Nazis.
To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish.
In the language of the U.S. Department of Defense, these are unidentified aerial phenomena.
Roswell's a very interesting place with a lot of people that would like to know what's going on.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone.
This is the Garden of Doom.
Welcome everybody into Garden of Doom. This week we have with us Robert Phoenix, and he is going to tell us a bunch of stuff that I don't know what they are. Maybe I do, I just don't know the terms. But before we get started, I want to greet Mr. Phoenix. How are you, Robert? Thanks for joining us.
I'm great, Jeff. Thanks for having me on today. I appreciate it.
Sure. Tell us a little bit about your background and your degrees and what you do.
Right. Okay. So I have 2 degrees, believe it or not. One is in English literature, which I acquired in 1984. That's when I graduated from San Francisco State. I think Annette Bening, the actress who's Warren Beatty's wife, was part of my graduating class, although I did not know her.
Sure, she was also the villain in Captain Marvel for you newbies.
Yeah, there you go. And then I actually have an Associate of Arts degree, which is an absolute nothing degree, from a junior college in California. But my time there was actually quite instructive, because I was involved in, back in the day, we used to call it telecommunications. And telecommunications was really more about radio and TV versus, say, like communication over the wire or over satellite links. That would come later. So that's what we called it. And I studied radio and TV for about 2 years at a junior college, and I learned a lot. And then I went through a weird weird event, and I changed my major because I kind of got a taste of that world in a way that was fairly unsavory for me. And then I became an English lit major, and I activated a different part of my brain. So before it was more production based, I grew up on TV. I knew a lot about just how to produce things naturally because I had watched a lot of TV my entire life. So I was like TV Tom from Willy Wonka, right? So, but then I had to look at the world through a much more critical lens. And I had about a 3-year intense training in English Lit. And I realized how little I knew. And some of that was based on the fact that my college professors pointed that out to me, which was good. It was humbling and good. And then I was also around like a whole cadre of people who'd been reading all their lives, and I was a TV guy, right? I just watched TV and movies and listened to the radio. I'd read every now and then. It wasn't like I was a non-reader. Like I'd read Dune in junior high school and stuff like that, but not, I wasn't reading, Madame Bovary, when I was a sophomore, or anything like that. So I encountered these people, and I'm like, wow, I'm in deep water here, because I'll never forget it. One day I had this class on romanticism, and we were studying Blake. And this one guy said to the teacher, he said, so in your estimation, Blake's cosmology is actually an exposition of libido. And I'm like, what the fuck is this guy talking about? And then the teacher thought about it for a moment. He was very thoughtful. He says, yes, I believe that to be true. So I knew I was in deep water. And that, coupled with the fact that I got really humbled by a professor there, and I'm grateful for that. I just shut the fuck up. And I said, I got to catch up really quickly. So I had an experience during that period of time which sort of dovetails with what happened with that part of my life. And it was, how do I talk about it without taking up too much airspace here? Basically, I had a dark night of the soul, and I was around 20, I was late 21, just maybe about to turn 22, late 21. It was, it was probably April of 1981. So I hadn't turned 21 yet, I was still 20. And I had this dark night of the soul, and it had to do with a lot of different things. It had to do with, me passing out the wheel of my car.
Wow.
On a Friday night, headed to San Francisco. I bounced off the center divider. I lived, woke up very quickly. But that started this whole string of events for that weekend. And by the end of the weekend, I had what I would call, for lack of a better term, a connection with God, because my life had spun so out of control over that 72 hours. And I'd hit a very dark place. And I got, I actually went into a prayer moment, help me out here. I'm having a very difficult time. I even had almost what I would call a past life review up to 20. Saw how much of a fuck up I was, how much potential theoretically I could have and squandered. And then I was lifted up out of that. And from that point forward, I knew that my life was going to be different. And coupled with that was a series of meetings with this older gentleman. I used to be a assistant recreation director at a singles apartment complex. And people who may not be old enough to know that there were actually apartments that were created for single people, right? And the idea was that you can live here, you'll be with other singles, we have a pool, we have a rec room, we have activities for you. So I was the assistant recreation director of this place.
It sounds like a interesting business model, except when they get together, then they have to get lost.
Well, I mean, it was the model itself, I think, was appealing for a lot of people at that time.
Until they weren't single.
Well, who were single, right? I mean, there's a lot of, just by going into a place like that, you have agreement, right? There's this unspoken agreement. I'm single, you're single, we're here to mingle, right? I mean, that's what it's about.
Right.
And in some instances, it was
Tinder residences.
People would meet each other, and maybe, they'd get married or whatever. But there was just a lot of debauchery that went on in these places.
Sure.
And I had a front row seat. So I met this guy there who was not part of that. He probably didn't get the memo. He was in his 60s, and he was what I would consider a mystic. He was the first mystic I'd met. So he would give me these mimeographed copies of pages from Edgar Casey or Rick Montgomery. And I'd read them. I'm like, wow, man, this is really interesting stuff. And I'd always had an interest in these things. But now I got this pipeline. This guy is feeding me stuff. So one day, I think it might have been one of my last days there. I wound up getting fired because I was kind of out of control. And he gave me this book, and it was this white book, hardbound, and that had these gold embossed letters that were, kind of sunken, right? And it was My Truth, the Lord Himself. And I'm like, okay, I'm not ready for this.
Yeah.
I'm not really ready for this. I'll take the Casey stuff and I just knew this is above my pay grade right now. So after I had this experience in San Francisco, I believe it was April of 2021, I said to myself, it's time for that book. So I started to read this book, and the most amazing thing happened to me in my life, and it was almost as if the words on the book just were really written on my soul. I'd never experienced anything like that. And I could only read like 2 or 3 pages, 4 pages at a time because the material was so dense.
Right.
And on some level I got it, and on another level I didn't get it. But the more that I read it, the more that I realized that I was getting more of it.
Yeah.
And as I continued to go through this book, my life started to really change. And as a result, when I decided that I was going to do this English Lit stuff, I just went into like overtime with it. Like I knew that I was in deep water with these people, but I also had this thirst and desire for quote unquote knowledge. So, I would have these classes and we'd have a syllabus, but then I'd read on top of that. Like I'd want to read reference works, reference points, like, who is Rollo May, who is Joseph Campbell, who is Carl Jung. So all these sort of tangential sources started to backfill for me. So that was a very interesting time. And eventually I wound up getting a degree in English literature. And it's one of those things where, I look back on my life and I can see that both of those experiences played a role, right? Like I learned the media stuff to some degree when I was in junior college, and then I got the other training. And I didn't know it at the time. I wasn't really like thinking, I'm going to put these two worlds together and somewhere down the line, I'm going to be able to use my, these skills or whatever that I learned to decode things, because that's really what you do as an English Lit major. You're supposed to find out, what the meaning of the work is, and then understand how to do it from a media standpoint. So that all came together in a kind of unique way. And then I began the esoteric journey, which led me to some places like Findhorn in Scotland. Are you familiar with Findhorn at all?
I don't think so.
So Findhorn was an intentional community that was started by Peter Caddy, Eileen Caddy, and Dorothy McLean. And I first found out about Findhorn through the movie My Dinner with Andre, which I'm sure you're probably familiar with.
Yep.
So I thought to myself, man, I got to go to this place. It sounds remarkable. So I did. I went there when I graduated from college. It was part of a post-grad experience with the University of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So I went to Findhorn and these two other communities. And, their whole thing was that, they grew these enormously large vegetables in a little trailer park in the Findhorn Bay. And that got the attention of the BBC, got all this press. These people wanted to go there. So this intentional community came out around it. The people around Findhorn have unique backgrounds. Like Dorothy was a member of the OSS, very early intelligence community.
Right. A precursor to the CIA.
Yeah, exactly. She was like the Canadian version of the OSS. And I met Dorothy, and she was a wonderful person. And Dorothy's work centered around connecting with sort of the Davic spirits of the plants. So if you go online, you'll see books by Dorothy McLean where these Davic spirits or these elementals of the plant kingdom are communicating with her. And they're pretty interesting in their own way. And then Peter was, I believe, RAF, and he was a Rosicrucian. So you can see that there might have been some interesting kind of occult and esoteric groups connected with freedom. I didn't know that at the time. I didn't really care. Well, even in retrospect, I don't really
connected with the most established institution you can think of, the military intelligence communities.
Absolutely.
So
and of course the BBC's there. They're doing the documentary on the place, right?
Right.
So even in retrospect, I really don't care if that's what happened, because I think the thing that I think is, as we move through this journey, right, it's really easy to sort of get caught up in this idea that, well, this is bad, and this is bad, and this is bad, and this is good, and anything that has 33 or 66 or 666 in it is considered to be evil. And I think that there's probably some truth to that. But there's also, like, you look at something like Findhorn, which looks like it was probably an intelligence operation to some degree, but out of it, you have some very interesting experiences and people that, that come out of it and come through it with a degree of, some form of enlightenment, whether it's valid or not. If it's not valid, then they find out it's not valid, and that's valid in and of itself, right?
Sure. Let me frame a little bit of this for the audience so that they have some context. I mean, they're probably putting things together as they listen. But you are identified as an astromythicist. Your biography also states astrologer, writer, speaker, and synchro mystic. So I think most people generally know what an astrologer is. I'm not sure if people know what an astromythicist is, and I'm not sure they know exactly what a synchro mystic is, though I think that if they reflect on what you were just saying, they probably got some of it. But let's start at the beginning. What is an astromythicist?
So an astromythicist is something I actually made up. And usually...
You're not my first guest who invented their own term, so that's okay.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, how do I describe what I did? And it's like, okay, I use astrology, but there's also mythology from the past, mythologies from the future, like, for instance, Blade Runner's mythology, and mythologies that we're currently engaged in. So, for instance, the whole cube movement is a mythology in and of itself. So we're swimming in a sea of myth, and it's being able to, like, make these connections, past, present, and future, and try to distill them in a way that we understand where we are, if we can. And astrology has become like a bedrock for me over the last, when did I really start getting into it professionally? Since 2008. So I was able to use things like mundane astrology to understand, to a large degree, not to the extent of everything, what I would call, a version of our reality. So you add the two together, using astrology and this idea that myth is a theme that runs through our lives, past, present, and future. And what I try to do is help understand those myths for myself and explain them to other people. And
synchromistic, just so we get the definition of it.
Synchromistic is not something I made up. It's a fairly common term. It's when people are able to use things like synchronicities as a point of departure, and they can lead people in any number of directions. Like I had Christopher Knowles on as a guest on my show a couple of weeks ago, and he classifies himself as a synchromistic.
When you say departures, do you mean like meditations that take you, sort of a, not to be trite, but out of body experience?
Well, not really. Kind of like along the lines of, let's take comic book heroes, for example. Like what is the current trend in comic book heroes? Well, for me, what I see, you mentioned Captain Marvel, is the emergence of, the feminine in comic books, in comic bookdom, for better or worse. I have my own opinions about it.
Sure.
So what does that mean, right? What is the, to me, this would be like an iteration of astromythicism, because when you look at a fixed star like Regulus, which for a very long period of time, we're talking literally thousands of years, it had been in the sign of Leo. And Regulus is considered to be the most royal of the royal stars. So when we think of Leo, what do we think about? We think about things like the hero's journey. We think about kings. We think about Arthurian legends. the Grail quest, all those things kind of go along with Leo,
Mm-hmm.
right? Athletes, the great athletes, Babe Ruth, Mickey Mantle,
Hercules, Richard the Lionhearted.
right? All that stuff falls into that Regulus and Leo territory. In 2011, it's very rare to watch a fixed star change signs, and we witnessed that in 2011 when Regulus went into the sign of Virgo. So what is Virgo? Virgo is not Leo. Virgo, first of all, Leo's masculine, Virgo's feminine. And Virgo has to do with like the people, right? So theoretically in astrology, if you look at Leo, Leo's rulership. But then they need the people in order to maintain their rulership.
Sure.
Right? They need the people to cut their lawns or cut their toenails or whatever. Well, that's very Virgo. And that's the next sign over. So Regulus made this huge shift. And I see it in terms of like the new version of heroes in modern mythology, Captain Marvel or, fill in the blanks.
Lady Thor, Lady Wolverine, Miss Marvel.
Yeah. Right. And even like what female Thor, right? I mean, things. So to me, that represents a relationship or reflection of this shift from Leo into Virgo with Regulus. So now we have a different way of looking.
So literally, as above, so is below. I mean,
now we're into astrotheology, which is another school of synchro-mysticism. And so these are the things I look at, I talk about, and you can even see it in terms of, because Virgo is very functionary, right? It's very, very functionary. And so when you look at people that are empowered now, theoretically, right, what do we see? We see a bunch of functionaries, and they're not even very good.
Barely functional.
This is part of the story. And we're at a very, nascent sort of place around all of this. And it will work itself out eventually. But in the early degrees of a sign, we get the most unfiltered and unadulterated potential of it. So that's a version of astromythicism, looking at what's happening currently and then looking at, where we are astrologically, me honing in on that fixed star, the shift from kind of masculine and male-oriented hero's journey into feminine-oriented hero's journey, and how it manifests now, for better or worse.
Right. Into the populism writ large is more of a Virgo. It's more of the sign of the people rather than the royalty.
Right, and it's feminine. I mean, I think that's a really important aspect to recognize, is that it's a feminine sign, and it's not a masculine sign. And we're seeing, and even this idea, the uncomfortable idea of having a guy who's taking estrogen, right? Because he can't win a medal in the male world, he moves over into the female world and starts to dominate, college swimming. Right, even that's kind of an iteration of it.
Leah Thomas, I think you're talking
Leah
about.
Thomas, right, Leah. It's interesting because Leah isn't that far from, like, Leo, right? It's like it has a similar, I mean, I don't think the etymology is the same, but, because I haven't really looked at it, but it sounds very similar.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like, okay, we're going to change the first name, we're gonna alter this. And I feel like that's kind of part of it. We're swimming, again, there's another metaphor, in this world now where it's upside down, because for a long time we've dealt with this Leo world. We've dealt with this idea that we would be on the hero's journey, and we would find our competency along the way, that somewhere in there this idea of the meritocracy would also be rewarded, but that's not true anymore. And so we see these functionaries that are being elevated who haven't even really earned those things, but because, and again, I'm not saying this is a direct outgrowth of this fixed star changing signs, but you can make a causal relationship between the two and say, oh, that's interesting. So now we've got people who should really be working at the DMV in higher positions of government. And that's why, and some of that I think actually is intentional as well, but that's a whole different discussion.
Right. It's funny because if you asked me 2 years ago when I started the show, and I didn't start it initially solo. The audience of the show is well aware of that, but this may be some context. But if you asked me 2 years ago about astrology, I'd be like, yeah, I don't know much about astrology. I know people read their signs. I know sometimes I read the signs. I know that I'm a Scorpio. People say I'm a typical Scorpio. I figure I was born in November. As a baby, I got exposed to pretty cold weather and gray weather, and that makes me moody. That was about the extent of it for me. Now, 2 years later, seeing how much is tied to 12, how much is tied to the signs in the sky, not just navigation, but so many other things. I mean, so many things are tied to astrology in religion, in the three major religions, but not just, in all cultures, that whether it's real or not, it's like one of those questions: who made what real? Did the astrology make it real, or did we make astrology real? And that's not a question that, it does sound like something that an astromythicist would be the right person to ask, but that's not the question I intend to ask, though if you feel it's important, we can get to it.
Yeah, well, I think it's a really interesting question, and I feel like that it's both, because, it's sort of like a version, in some ways, of machine learning, right? Like we, through our intentionality, populate how do I say this? We animate it, right? Through our intentionality, we animate the thing.
Right.
But the thing, there's got to be a thing there for us to be able to say yes to and animate, or else it wouldn't work. Right? It is a reciprocal relationship. And at the end of the day, and this is, I teach astrology, and I have a show that I do on Sunday nights about astrology. At the end of the day, I tell people it's just a system, and all systems are finite. So it can be very, very useful in understanding certain things about who we are, human nature, the mundane potential of astrology, the astro-mythological potential for astrology. I think it's a really good tool. It's not the ultimate tool. The ultimate tool goes beyond that. It's not even a tool, it's just business.
I have a few questions for you on the basics of astrology, because I'm not sure that all my listeners know that much about it. I'm not sure I know that much about it. So, listen, until a few months ago, I really didn't understand what the basis of astrology was. I mean, the most simplistic basis. And as I understand it, it's just the procession that follows the sun's procession, whatever the order of the constellations are. I'm not even sure that's correct, because listen, I used to have actually my dad, who's 81 now, in his bedroom in my grandparents' house, had these two maps with anthropomorphized or artistic renderings of the constellations. They were navigational maps, and they were really cool. The reason I talk about them is because I would show them to you so you could help me with them, except I think I sort of lost them in my divorce. Even though they were from my, who knows, they were probably my grandfather's for all you know. Anyway, that's not important, except that, there's far more than the 12 constellations. In fact, I was reading something that if you do the math, 4 weeks in a month, the phases of the moon, you actually come out with 48 weeks. And so there's a 13th, there should be a 13th month. And then I looked into that. Yeah. And there's this poor Ophiuchus.
Right.
Ophiuchus.
So I think this is an important distinction to make.
It's very important to me because it's my sign that bumped Ophiuchus out. I'm a Scorpio, and Scorpio is only apparently there for 7 days. So so I feel great about that, but I want to know, what did Ophiuchus do to me?
Ophiuchus didn't really do anything to you. So when you look at astrology, the Western version of astrology is sign-based. It is not constellation-based. And Ptolemy, who was the father of Western astrology, made a change, right? He made a change, and he said, this is going to be the astrological new year, which starts in Aries, and it ends in Pisces.
Wait, so let's say Ptolemy, like the Alexander the Great general Ptolemy?
Yes.
Okay.
That's Ptolemy.
So we're talking about, what's that, about 500 BC, 400 BC, something like that?
Yes. Okay. Yes. So Ptolemy changes everything with astrology. And before that, like if you look at a constellation-based astrology, just using 13 constellations, you could do that in sidereal astrology, but you have to go to a lunation or lunar-based system where you have essentially 13 months, right? You have 13 months, and you have 20 days, so you get the 360. I'm sorry, so 360. No, it's 230. It's 230. So that's similar to the Mayan calendar, which is also a lunation-based system. So Ptolemy comes along and says 12 signs. We start with Aries, astrological New Year. We go through that, and then we end in Pisces. So Ptolemy was really more of an astronomer, and he did write a book on astrology, but that's not considered his major work. His major work is much more in astronomy.
What's a thumbnail distinction between astronomy and astrology, and then pick up where you left off?
So they were more closely linked a long time ago. Like in Ptolemy's world, there was very little distinction between the two. But if you're an astronomer now, like you would not, first of all, more than likely you wouldn't agree with astrology, because most of the time astronomers will invariably bring up, hey, did you know there's actually 13 signs, right? That were like,
I just did.
Right, exactly. So there's a bit of a distinction between the two because they're different systems. Like Ptolemy changed how we look at astronomy by turning it into a regimented system, basically of equal houses at a 360-degree map, right, for essentially a solar year. So, but what's interesting about astronomy and astrology is that they both recognize the retrograde motion of planets, which I think is fascinating. It's like, oh, well, look, astronomy recognizes a retrograde motion. So does astrology. So they still have something in common, although what they agree upon is very, very different.
What's retrograde mean?
Retrograde, it's when a planet appears to go backwards in the sky, right? So when you look at a Mercury retrograde, there's a time when it looks like Mercury's actually moving backwards. Now, some people will say that it's an optical illusion, but if it's an optical illusion, then why do astronomers and astrologers agree upon that? There's astrologers who don't even believe in Mercury retrograde. There are very few of them, but there's no one size fits all model. Mm-hmm. Like even now in what we would call modern astrology, a lot of people, especially younger people, have been indoctrinated in what we call like whole signs or equal houses, because it seems to be closer to Hellenic astrology. Please don't ask me about Hellenic astrology. Deal. Because my knowledge of Hellenic astrology is very limited. Okay. And I don't want to sound like an idiot, although I'm not afraid to every now and then. But I like to stay, into things I mostly know about. If I don't know about them, I'll tell you that I don't know about it. But the other thing too with whole sign and equal houses is that it's easier. It's like it's kind of a pie model. Every slice of the pie is the same. Right. Whereas with what we call Placidus astrology, the houses aren't always equal. And you may have some houses that are what we call intercepted. I don't want to get too technical, but so the whole idea of astrology and how it works, and you may actually ask me that question. So let me give you my thoughts around how I think it works. Sure. Part of it we've already discussed, which is we're feeding into the model by our conscious intention and participation with it. Right, but again, there has to be there for us to do it. The commonly held thought, and I think that there's some truth to this, is that the planets, and again, you're going to have to understand that there is an idea of space, which I do think there is, that these planets would have an impact on one another, right? That they would have some kind of geocosmic potential around influencing other planets in relationship to space and where you were born at a particular time, right? And the idea that you were born in November, that there is a different quality of light during that time, that all factors into it, unless, of course, you were born in November in South America, which flips everything on its head. Right. Right. So is there a universal definition above the equator and below the equator? My answer to that would be yes. So when you look at how they, again, theoretically discovered Uranus, because you can see Saturn in the night sky, right? Saturn is the furthest planet you can see. Can't see Uranus. But when they started to have telescopes, they being astronomers, began to notice that Saturn was having these perturbations. Well, what's going on with the perturbation? Why is it doing this thing that Jupiter isn't doing or Mars isn't doing? So they began to wrap their heads around there was something interfering with the field of Saturn, beyond Saturn.
Gravitational interaction or whatnot.
Right, exactly. So the idea was that the amplification power with telescopes got better. And then they were like, oh, look, there's this thing that's behind Saturn that's actually influencing Saturn.
So retrograde is when something else is interacting with that other planet or celestial body.
No, retrograde has nothing to do with that.
Oh.
Retrograde is, again, when a planet looks like it's moving backwards. Now, here, let me backtrack. I'm going to be honest. I've never looked into that. So maybe that could be something causal with retrograde.
Okay.
Right? So I'm not going to dismiss that. But
for our purposes, retrograde is just the appearance from Earth when you see a planet that looks like it's going backwards. Exactly. The reason why is beyond the scope of this conversation.
So the same thing happened with Uranus. Uranus displayed the same perturbations. And they applied the same technique. Telescopic power got better, and hence they discovered Neptune.
Right.
And then that goes all the way out to Pluto. And then theoretically, they've even discovered what they call exoplanets that are beyond Pluto, like Eris and a few others. So the idea that these planets would have impact on the other planet is one credence of thought, that these planets have this ability to influence one another in the galactic field or in the cosmic field. And I think there's some truth to that. The other component here tends to be in areas that may not even be provable, like, for instance, Casey's idea of what these planets represent. They represent consciousness. And in Casey's world, Edgar Casey's world.
Yeah, so let's look back for a second. For folks who don't know who Edgar Casey is, and listen, I'm going to give you a very dime store description because I'm not even sure I'm 100% correct. But Edgar Casey was very famous for writing about Atlantis, which he apparently had visions about. But he's equally famous for being a long-distance psychic healer. People he never met, and there's something like 230 or something like that documented cases, whatever that means, of his interventions working on healing people. And I think, if I'm not correct, it was around 100 years ago?
Yeah, and Casey, exactly. Casey was known as the Sleeping Prophet. And one of the famous cases with Casey was a woman who came to him, literally came to him. He lived in Virginia Beach, and came to him for a session. And he was in a trance. He did not know where she was from. She did not speak, but she was there. And somebody was able to basically tell him what her condition was. And he started to speak to her in Italian. Right. So this is documented. And he would do things like this. He would sleep on books, and theoretically he would, acquire knowledge from sleeping on a book. And his cures, he had a number of cures he also came up with, quite interesting. And a lot of them were spot on the money. So Casey's idea around planets is that planets represented a certain type of consciousness. So, for instance, if you, in the interim of your life, if you wanted to, like after you leave your body, if you wanted to go learn about love, you would go to Venus, and Venus would that's what you'd go there to experience and learn. Or if you wanted to go to another planet and wanted to experience, I don't know, expansion, you might go to Jupiter or something like that. You can actually get Edgar Casey astrological reports, and some of this gets into this with his work. Steiner has his own theory planets and consciousness. And
Rudolf
astrology.
Steiner, right?
That's right. Yeah, and even Carl Jung had a very strong interest in astrology from like an archetypal perspective. So I think that for me, in my experience in working with astrology and trying and looking at what we would call mundane factors, that when I say mundane, it's how you use astrology to look at events in the world.
That's fine. This is a 101 level course.
Yeah, so I just thought I'd bring that up, right? Like when I use the word mundane, it's like, well, looking at something like 9/11 or the Kennedy assassination, and see, okay, what was going on astrologically at the time. And my experience with mundane astrology has been revelatory in terms of looking at certain things. And even it's really interesting because in sidereal astrology, like you're about 15 degrees behind your sun sign with sidereal astrology. And sidereal astrology, again, is based on this other system where we just talked about 13 signs, etc. So I like to road test these sorts of things just to make sure that we're talking about like the like is there a there? So I remember getting into this sidereal versus Placidus debate with this guy one time on Facebook, and he was really adamant that the elites use sidereal astrology and they give us mundane astrology to distract us, blah blah blah. And there may be some truth to that. I wouldn't dispute that. But it's like, okay, well, let's test. Have you ever tested your theory? And he's like, well, no, I haven't. I said, well, I have. So let me give you an example. So there's a boxer by the name of Tyson Fury. Do you know who he is?
I do. Yeah.
Okay. So what do they call Tyson Fury? Do you know his nickname?
Oh, no, I don't. I would think with the last name Fury, you don't need a nickname. So no, I don't know that.
No, his nickname is the Gypsy King.
No. Well, I didn't know you were so allowed to use the word gypsy, but all right.
Yeah, no, you can because he is a gypsy. He's not a Rom, but he's a gypsy in the sense that Brad Pitt was a gypsy in the movie not Lost October, but the other
Snatch.
one. Snatch, yeah, Brad Pitt. He's that kind of a gypsy.
I love the movie Snatch, but
it's a great movie. He comes from that community where they live in caravans.
Okay.
Right. And what does Brad Pitt do? He's a fighter. He's a boxer.
Yep.
So that's Tyson Fury's world. Astrologically, do you remember when he fought Deontay Wilder for the second time? Do you remember how he came into the ring?
Oh no, I haven't watched boxing probably since Evander Holyfield.
So Tyson Fury comes into the ring on a throne, and he's got a crown.
Yeah, well, he's a king. There you go.
He's a king, right? So guess what his sign is?
Ooh, well, what's the sign for the kings? Leo, right?
Exactly, that's a sign. So if I were to use sidereal astrology and back out 15 days from Tyson Fury, that would make him a Cancer.
Mm-hmm.
That is not the behavior of a Cancer. A Cancer would not call themselves the Gypsy King. Okay, so I'm not saying that there isn't a there with sidereal astrology, and I think there is. But we live in my estimation, because we've been doing this for so long now, we live in a mundane world, and maybe it's more mundane than we actually understand. But that's the difference between the two, right? Like he shows up as a Leo, but in the sidereal world, he's a Cancer, and that is not the behavior of a Cancer. Trust me, they wouldn't do that. So anyway, that's kind of the long and short of it. And I think that this idea that there's this geocosmic influence, which I do believe there is, and also that we've animated the system, and I do believe that we have, and that we live in an archetypal universe, and these are the expressions of archetypes through our daily lives. And so there's another component to that. You add it all up, and it becomes a very interesting way of looking at and trying to understand the world without becoming overly orthodox. Like there are a lot of astrologers who get so micro and fractal with everything. Like this is going on today, this is going on today, this is going on today. And I'm like, lighten up. right? Just lighten up and live your life. And yeah, it's good to know about these things. Good to understand what's going on in your chart or what's going on in the world. But like, if you live your life like that, how can you truly be free? And it's like a prison or a cage, if you ask me.
Right, one that you of your own construct. But
exactly.
To borrow your word, mundane, I'd want to go back to the basics, back to the mundane. Probably not the same way you used it, but both without a pejorative. Just, like normal. You can't say normal anymore without having to explain what you mean by normal.
Right.
So, can you explain how did we come upon these 12 constellations? I mean, am I correct?
The 12 signs. The 12 signs.
And they do follow do they follow the precession of the sun? What does the age of Aquarius mean? Like, what are these basics? What does this mean, and how did we come about these 12 signs? And then we can get into the 13th, because I know that, the sun, I'm told, is the 13th sign, but it's sort of not, and I sort of have my own theories as to why it replaced it. That's not important. My theories don't matter, because you're the guest.
Well, no, your theories do matter. I'd be interested in your theories.
Well, we'll get to them later on if we remember. I want the audience to know whatever counts for objective in this world as to how did we get these 12 signs? How are they determined? And then I am a little bit obsessed with that 13th sign, so I want to talk about that too.
So the 12 signs, again, they come out of this Ptolemaic tradition, right? So if you look at the sign of Aries, like, what do you see with Aries? Well, there are two symbols really for Aries. Well, there's one symbol. It's like the ram's head,
mm-hmm.
right? So the most like simple relationship to that is this thing that comes straight up, and then it has these two like curving lines.
Yeah, branches.
Yeah, I mean, that's also symbolic of growth coming out of the ground, which is related to the springtime.
Right.
So these are, in a lot of ways, these are agronomical symbols.
Or a chalice, to steal from Dan Brown and his books.
The other thing that Aries is related to, if you, again, look at it, it's related to the reproductive system of a woman.
Yeah, fallopian. There you go.
Exactly. So there are two symbols for Aries. One would be fertility, and the other would be new growth. And that would be synonymous with the springtime.
Mm-hmm.
So we can go through pretty much every sign, and there would be a symbolic representation.
I mean, even more basic than that. I mean, is it that these signs follow the precession of the sun in the same position of the sun?
I would say yes. I mean, now you're talking about like astrological ages, right? And the precession of the equinoxes.
Mm-hmm.
So going from the age of Aries to the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. And again, we're getting into, what is that, a 26,000 year cycle?
Something
right?
like that,
yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah. So if you want to go to the macro, that's how it works, theoretically, right? And in that precession, things move in a reverse order. So theoretically, we've been in the age of Pisces. Some people say we'll be in the age of Pisces for like another, I forget the exact number, 1,700 years or something like that.
Yeah, they're basically.
Now where it's a real, fuzzy, astrological logic.
No, I get that. I just sort of
So the signs, to answer your question, the signs follow the precession of the equinoxes through the astrological years.
Okay. All right. So then let's get back to our friend, the 13th sign. What was it? Ophiuchus?
Ophiuchus.
Ophiuchus. All right. What's poor Ophiuchus, and what happened to Ophiuchus?
Got cast out. Ophiuchus is the serpent, right? I mean, it's kind of like the serpent getting cast out of the garden.
Yeah, okay, so that is my theory, and that is correct, because it's the serpent of the serpent bearer, right? So
that's right.
It was replaced by the sun. So that sort of fits with I think anybody who's listened to the show, but even if this is the first time, sort of obvious, the sun replacing the serpent, what that is symbolic of in almost any of the Abrahamic religions, and in a lot of places, serpents sort of get a bad rap, right or wrong, I don't know. That's a matter for other debates as well. And I know in, say, Chinese culture, that it's like the opposite. the sun never gets a bad rap, but serpents, are sort of venerated, or certain serpents. Anyway, so it's as simple as that. Ophiuchus is the serpent.
Here's another way of looking at it. Theoretically, let's say there is this idea of a serpent line, of serpent bloodline, serpentine bloodline. If I was a member of the serpentine bloodline, I'd like to have, whatever kind of remnant or trace of that removed. Because I would, that's a cult, right? That's being, that's the bloodline being occulted and hidden. So it's like, oh, is that interesting? Yeah, why don't we take this out? It's like, yeah, this never really existed. We're going to have a different model. So we can theoretically operate in secrecy from behind the scenes. But it's another way of looking at it.
So you're saying that the members of Ophiuchus did it on purpose, so to help be secretive, as opposed to they were cast out. They sort of voluntarily bowed out and helped say, hey, don't mind us, we're not here.
That's right. That's another way of looking at it.
Okay, so I mean, the cast out is rather convenient then. The we did this to ourselves is more fits in with the narrative of a sort of a scheme or a plan, or scheme or plan are the same thing. That's interesting because it's funny how you mentioned Ophiuchus is a cult. Why is it more of a cult than Leo or Aries or Capricorn or Gemini? I mean, they're
because it's hidden. The whole idea of the word cult remains hidden
from occult.
So occult. Yeah, it's like occulted. It's like not seen. Scorpio is an occulted sign because it's an 8th house sign.
No, that's
and
me.
It's generally it's not seen. Leo's not occulted because Leo's like it's the sun. It's front and center. It's like it's out there theoretically, right? And most of the rest of the signs are, except for I think Pisces is an occulted sign too, because it's a 12th house sign. And it's a hidden sign. So
there's so much here that we're not going to be able to get into because it's so beyond where I am yet. Yeah, that's the key word. Is that why I'm maybe a little bit obsessed with Ophiuchus, because I'm a Scorpio, and so we're sort of neighbors?
Well, I think obsession is part of the Scorpio makeup, right? Yeah. Obsession is if you were to go and look up Scorpio online, it would take you maybe 1 or 2 passes to find the word obsession that would show up in as a bullet point. And so maybe that's part of it. Maybe it's just part of your natural makeup. I'm a Scorpio rising, so I get obsessed about certain things.
What does Scorpio rising mean? How's that different than Scorpio?
Well, the rising sign is like, what sign was rising at the time you were born, not the constellation.
Oh, although, I see.
If you were to get into sidereal ascendants, it would be constellation. But in Western astrology, Placidus astrology, it's the sign that was rising at the time you were born. And through the rising sign, you display characteristics that you show the world. So it's almost like you're learning through that. You're learning through that approach to the world.
Is rising like the opposite of retrograde? It just appears that things are moving closer to us? Or is it not related at all?
It's not related at all.
What's the opposite of retrograde?
Direct.
Okay. So rising is not part of this. So what is how would you tell someone who had no idea what a rising sign is? Me. What does rising sign mean?
So the rising sign is, think of it as being like a mask, that you're putting a mask on, and you get to learn how to interact with the world through that mask until there's a certain level of integration with that. So your sun sign theoretically is what you're born into, and you're bringing that without any kind of struggle into this lifetime, right? You're going to experience those things. But the rising sign allows you to learn something different than your sun sign until there's a certain point where you integrate it, and then the two theoretically can work together so that you can have an approach to the world that is both internal and external.
All right. I was looking, I'm sorry, I'm looking at something here, and apparently the same gentleman who, at least most recently, proposed that 13th sign said there should also be a 14th sign, Cetus. First of all, is that correct? And what's that all about?
Well, there's a number, Cetus is the whale. Right. Cetus is the whale.
It's like Cephod. Okay, got it.
Yeah. So, again, if you wanted to play with, at some point though, right, the one thing about the 12 sign system is that you can wrap your head around it, right? It's you and I are having a fairly basic conversation about astrology. What if we introduced 16 other signs and they were all part of who you are? Now all of a sudden we're dealing with different levels of complexity, micro complexity. And the beautiful thing about astrology is the system that I use, which is Placidus, Western Placidus astrology, is that each of the houses represent something specific, right? You can use that as a guide and a map to understand who you are and how the world works. So, for instance, I'll give you a quick tour around the chart. All right?
Please.
So you have your first breath and you come into the body. That's Aries. Aries is will, right? Will unmanifest, meaning you just are. You just are. Aries is pure will. I think it's an aphorism from William Blake. Does the oak tree tell the daffodil how to grow? No. The daffodil just grows, right? It has an isness to it. So Aries is about isness. There is no undifferentiation with Aries. So if you take that, you apply that to the state of being a baby, right? What do you do as a baby? You laugh, you cry, you shit, you eat. You don't even think about it, right? There's no thinking involved. Okay, well, that lasts for a little while. Then what happens? Well, eventually, you get toilet trained. That is the first function that happens to an individual that differentiates that from their will made unmanifest. Now, all of a sudden, you got to be conscious of your bowels. Oh, I'm about to take a poop. I've got to hold it. I have to clench my sphincter, right? And then guess what you have to do? You got to figure out how to wipe it yourself, right? Now you're into the sign of Taurus. Taurus has to do with bodily functions and becoming aware of your bodily functions. What you eat, what happens, all those things, primary. It separates you out from your individual will made unmanifest where everything was done for you and you didn't have to think about it. All right, let's go on to the third house. The third house is Gemini. Gemini is when language comes into play. It represents language, communication. It represents your family, siblings. And even in Gemini, we deal with things like duality, right? Because of the twins. So when you go to school, because Gemini represents early childhood education all the way up really through high school, what happens? You go to school, and if you act out, you get a dunce cap put on you, put in the corner, right? So now you're learning about this whole idea of what's right and wrong in a social setting. So that's Gemini kicks in, and you have duality. So you learn about how to communicate, you get education, and you become aware of other people in your environment, i.e. your siblings. The fourth house is your home. And this is where, by the way, if we go back to the second house in Taurus, that's where you learn material values. Material values. And the prime material value that a person understands, and I'm sorry to break it down in such fundamental terms, is when to shit or not shit. And then what you do afterwards. Everything from that point forward is an aggregation of that, more or less. And then you get to the fourth house. What do you learn in the fourth house? Well, that's where you receive everything that's related to your family, emotional values. You get your influences from your mother, your home life, right? So what we see here is we see the progression of the chart from not having any language skills, from just being, just pooping, just eating, just laughing, just crying, to learning how to speak with Gemini. And now you look around you and you go, oh, okay, well, these are the people that I'm living with. These are the emotional values I'm getting from them. right? Then you go into the 5th house, which is Leo. It's about the things that you love. You might find a hobby or a pastime. Gee, I'm really into comic books, or I like playing sports, or I enjoy, drawing or cooking or whatever those things are. And you fall in love in the 5th house. That's Leo, right? So now you're becoming more complex. You're finding things that you're drawn to. And usually these things happen to some degree of childhood, which, in our timeline, we could run that probably all the way up to 30. But really about 15, 16, 17. Then we get to the 6th house. Traditionally, the 6th house has to do with Virgo. And the thing that you love is the thing that you learn. Theoretically, this is what's supposed to happen. And then you get training, whatever that thing is. Apprenticeship. Hold on a second.
No, it's the elite.
I just got a call from Paradise.
Oh, well, that's a good place to get called from.
Paradise Property Management. I have to get this call in a bit. So, anyway, you get to the 6th house, and you're supposed to learn something, right? You get good at it. I'll use William Blake as an example. He was an illustrator, and he learned how to apprentice through illustrations by going to the morgue in London, and he would do still lives of dead bodies. Right, that's where he got his apprenticeship, and then he printed acid etch. He actually developed the acid etch plate printing model. Right?
I think I learned that at some point.
So then once you get really good at something, you can take care of yourself. Then what happens? You go to the 7th house, you have relationship, right? And in relationship, you can take care of the other person theoretically,
right?
Right. So there's like a wisdom to this. So then Libra, the scales, ruled by Venus, balance, justice, contract. So you have a contract with another person. Oh, you like me? Yes. I like you? Yes. We're going to get married? Yeah. Why don't we do that? Okay, then what happens after that? You go into your sign, Scorpio, which is the 8th house, and then you procreate. Scorpio rules sex. So now you have progeny. Right? And once you have progeny, then what? Now you've got a family. Well, what do you need for your family? You need spiritual and religious training. So you have a moral basis and foundation to raise that family and live your life. What does that look like? The 9th house in Sagittarius. Once you have your spiritual basis foundation, spiritual religious foundation and training, then what? Then you can go into the 10th house. Right? And in the 10th house, what do? You take everything you learn from the 6th house so that you can have a much bigger career. That's Capricorn. You can start a company. The idea is that if you start a company, you'll have the spiritual, religious, and moral training so you don't fuck anybody over. That you have the ability to do that and run a sound business.
How am I supposed to start a company without fucking anyone over? I'm kidding.
Well,
I'm kidding.
That's right. Well, we can get into that because the process got corrupted. I'll tell you why.
Okay.
So then you get to so once you're done, because most people would spend the majority of their lives theoretically in the 10th house until they can no longer do what they're supposed to do, either through the accomplishment of certain goals or like, I'm just done with this, I'm too old, I can no longer do this work, right? Then what's next after that? Well, then they go to the 11th house, which is Aquarius. So in the 11th house, you would have theoretically more leisure time. You would have more altruistic time because Aquarius tends to be altruistic, right? So all the things that you acquire materially through your 10th house life, you would give back to some degree, and then you would enjoy time, either playing golf or pickleball or whatever that is, right? It's like, okay, I'm done. But then what happens, eventually you find out your friends start dying, and then eventually you're going to die. So where do you go? You go to the 12th house. You go to Pisces. What does Pisces represent? Hospitals, convalescence. It's also where you leave the chart. So if you were to go and throw in, 3, 4 other signs, what are you going to get out of that? Like you would have these kind of micro zones where you might have more nuance and it might be interesting, But I just showed you the kind of the path for life. It's all there in the chart, in the wheel. But the challenge, here's what happened. This is the answer to your question. We replaced spiritual training in apprenticeship with college and university, because that's what the ninth house represents now. Universities, which are pretty much a modern thing. You know, like a lot of people who were part of the masses did not go to college. You got a trade, you got a job, and you started working. You know, this whole idea of college really takes off post-World War II with the GI Bill. So then what happens? Well, people lose a very important element with that sixth house. To learn a skill and to learn a craft and to become competent at it. That sixth house represents, in a lot of ways, a ritualization. Because when you go into something, you might be okay at it, but I guarantee you'll be better at it after you go through that apprenticeship. And a real steward, right, who's going to work with you on your apprenticeship skills is not supposed to coddle you. They're supposed to show you where your shortcomings are. And to, you know, if they're really good, they'll reward what you're good at, but they'll make it very clear what you're not good at.
Let me ask you a question on that, though. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but isn't the idea of college so that if anyone goes there, they can sort of pick their own trade, so they could sort of break the bonds of doing what their father did?
Yes, but what happens with college is you get a bunch of entitled people who are not really prepared to go into the 10th house. So they get a degree, they've had no real moral training, no real religious training, no real skill training. And so you have a bunch of snot-nosed people who think they know what they're doing because they got a piece of paper. In some degrees, maybe that's true. I don't want to dismiss everybody that's gone to college. You've gone to college, you got a law degree. I went to college. But what happens now is that you get people that come out of that institution and they have, not every case, but in a lot of cases, very low emotional IQs. Mm-hmm. And they're not really ready to deal with the real world. And in fact, there's often, even more so now than ever, there's a real sense of entitlement. Mm-hmm. Because they haven't had any real work. So we corrupted. We skipped the sixth house now. So you go from the fifth house, well, I love this and I love this, and you go straight to the ninth house, which I'm going to go to college, I'm going to get a degree, I'm going to get knowledge, and then I'm going to go into the 10th house. What happens? You skip the sixth house, the seventh house, and the eighth house. Like, we're not living a full astrological life. And for better or worse. And I know this for a fact, because when I went into, like, going back to the beginning of our conversation, our two college experiences, my two college experiences, when I went to, State University, I thought I was hot shit. And then I got laid down real quick. And that was the beginning of my apprenticeship. I had to understand what I didn't know. But not everybody that goes to college knows that or experiences that. That was my experience. So I got a sixth house and a ninth house experience simultaneously. In my perfect world, people would take at least 2 years off and have like what they call a bump year, and like go learn something. Mm-hmm. Go see how hard the real world is, and try to master a skill, or at the very least try to work in the world for a year or two, so that when you do go to college, you'll appreciate it a lot more, and you'll figure out, man, I don't ever want to do that again. These are just my thoughts, and this is how I kind of have evolved through this.
It's an interesting way that you're sort of blending astrology with the sort of sociological phenomena that's occurring here, and not just in the first world, or that's an outdated term, but the developed countries. That's interesting, because when you're talking, I'm thinking, yeah, there's a whole lot of people, they sort of go to college or school, and then they, but they never stop playing video games, they sort of just, they're gaming, and not to put down what I'm doing right now, probably what you do, but, a lot of people, they think podcasting and gaming is a career. And that's sort of like that, you were saying that ninth house there, or whether they're skipping, or the 10th house, they're sort of skipping sort of the in-between, the where you, learn to be a human, learn to work for what you've got, learn to appreciate what you've got.
It's also relationships and commitment and carrying out agreements. Like, you don't do that without going through the 7th house. And the 8th house, which is very scorpionic, you deal with sex, you deal with procreation, you deal with temptation, you deal with a lot of different darker psychological moral dilemmas in that space.
Yeah, I can vouch for that one.
Yeah, and everybody has to go through that. I think everybody has to go through it so they know not what to do. Unless you're one of these rare people, and they do exist, who have had, great genes, great epigenetic surroundings and great family training, in which case, your lessons in that world might be a little less intense or graphic or difficult.
Yeah, I'm not sure about what my causes are. I can't blame anything on anyone but me. So,
that's good.
Yeah. All right. So, I think at some point we were talking about. So, what is the impact astrologically about retrograde versus direct?
So, retrograde. Let's say it's a Mercury retrograde. That's the most commonly talked about retrograde. First of all, I'm an astrologer where I, in like a real-time sense, place less and less emphasis on Mercury retrograde.
Okay.
And the reason why is because I feel like we get engaged in self-fulfilling prophecies, and they're very powerful. So if you think that Mercury retrograde is going to fuck up your life, there's more than a better chance it'll fuck up your life. Right. That said, I think that there is some truth to Mercury. I've experienced it. But it's not like I go in and I start marketing Mercury retrograde in the shadow of Mercury retrograde 2.5 weeks beforehand. I don't do that. Right. So the idea of Mercury retrograde. Well, yeah, this is an interesting example. All right. So theoretically, things that are associated with Mercury would operate in reverse. Right. For instance, travel. You might experience travel delays. You might experience a breakdown that are with things that are related to travel. Usually with Mercury retrograde, you don't really want to sign contracts. And I do believe that to be true, by the way, because those things could become undone. But there would not be a sound basis for that. And one of the reasons why I know that is because I got married on a Mercury retrograde and didn't turn out so well. So I think Mercury retrograde is interesting from that perspective. Like but there's a positive thing too with retrograde. Like there are things that you may have lost, and they may show up during Mercury. There are things that can be fixed during Mercury retrograde. Like repairs can be. We're dealing with the reroute, right? Retrograde, repair, regenerate. So some of those things can happen during Mercury. I'll tell you a story. This is one of my favorite stories to tell. I was with this guy.
Wait, before you tell the story, let me. Because
yeah.
I heard someone else say something similar to this, so it sounds like you're saying the same thing. Did any of the words that start with RE, you can turn them into a positive, revisit, reevaluate, review.
Exactly.
So it doesn't have to be retrograde as in retard or something bad. You can turn it into something where you're reevaluating and going forward. You just have to know how to use it.
That's right. Exactly. That's why I think some knowledge of astrology is useful. Do you have to become an astrology geek? No, I don't think so. Not everybody has a head for it.
That's a lot.
And just like I don't have a head for being an electrical engineer. That's why I'd hire one, because I don't want to shock myself.
Yes.
Anyway,
it's amazing.
So I was with a friend of mine, and we were parked one day outside of a market in San Francisco. We were on the backside of the market, and I remember at that time Mercury was retrograde in the sign of Gemini, and he asked me. He said, "So tell me about Mercury retrograde." And I said, "Well, it's this, it's that. I mean, Gemini, you really got to watch out for impatience through travel. If you have impatience through travel, it could be dangerous." And as soon as I said that, this guy took the corner too fast in the area that we were in, and he wound up slamming into a parked car. And I said to my friend, I said, just like that. So it was a real-time exposition of Mercury retrograde, which doesn't always happen. But in Gemini, sometimes it does. So that was an example of Mercury retrograde in Gemini in a real-time space.
Gotcha. So direct, talk about direct. So, I mean, I think maybe...
Well, let's talk about Mercury retrograde. Let's talk about retrograde planets in a chart, because I think that's a more kind of... We can go to direct, but I think that's an interesting... Let's say you have 3 or 4 planets retrograde in a chart, which people do. It's like, okay, well, what are those planets? Where are they? And what do they represent? And usually a lot of retrograde motion in a chart can indicate that a person is going to learn more from their mistakes than what they do right, and that there can actually be practical, applicable examples of that. So if you want to be an analyst, if you've got a bunch of retrograde action in your chart, it could actually be helpful, because you would know what doesn't work versus what works.
Okay.
So again, there's the, finding, for me with astrology, finding the flow of the chart and finding the flow for the individual is really where it's at, and not fighting against it. And to understand kind of what these things are and what you're good at, where the challenges are, how you overcome those challenges, looking at real-time examples, going into the past, talking about the present, and speculating on the future. Direct is essentially when a planet, over a period of time will go direct. Saturn will have 3 retrograde motions during the Saturn transit, right? They'll have 3 retrograde motions. And over a planet, that means something. When a planet goes retro, let's say you have a Sun-Saturn conjunction. Well, the first time Saturn conjuncts your Sun, you become aware of limitation, because that's how Saturn works. It's about limitation. Saturn moves past the Sun, you say, okay, I got a handle on this limitation. I figured out what I can do. I got this, right? I just, write a few extra documents, cover my ass, blah, blah, blah. Okay, here comes Saturn. It retrogrades again, comes back over the Sun, and you realize that you didn't have it together as you thought you did. So then it goes retrograde, it goes past the Sun, and now you've got to, reevaluate. There's that word. Reevaluate your approach, that you weren't as right or correct the first time. And if you're humble enough, you'll understand it. And then you'll go back and you'll think about your approach, you'll reapproach it, you'll come up with something else, whatever that something else is. It could be even just admitting that you weren't right.
So retrograde is in essence your mistakes. Direct is seeing if you can learn from your mistakes, and then the next retrograde.
Theoretically, I think that's a distillation of it.
Yeah.
It could be somebody else's mistakes too. Right? Depends on the planet. Like if it's a Neptune retrograde, it could be somebody else's mistake. And then what you thought for a long time was, I'm the one to blame. I'm the one to blame. I'm the one to blame. Neptune retrograde comes in, you realize, holy shit, I've been a patsy here. And all these other people have set up their reality in a way that allowed me to believe it. And guess what? I'm not down with that. Right? So like a Mercury retrograde, Neptune retrograde over your Sun can be very disillusioning. You could be looking at like the falsity and the lie of the world with a Neptune retrograde. And that's not even necessarily a person's fault. It's a byproduct of their enculturation.
Wow, there's a lot of stuff. I don't think that I could possibly distill all of it, and I feel a little bit bad because we haven't talked at all about what is what was the synchro mystic? What was the word?
Well, the synchromysticism has to do with like looking at events in the world and seeing them as an extrapolation of something larger, and that there's a pattern at work.
Oh, so it's directly related to what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. I mean, it's good in that I feel like we didn't ignore half of what we were going to talk about because they're interrelated.
They're interrelated. The astromythicist part was just something. It's like, okay, I need to come up with something that I do I'm an astrologer, yes, but I'm not a typical astrologer. So this is the closest. That was the closest I could come up.
No,
but there are a lot of people.
It's a good
who
word.
Do identify as synchro mystics, and some of them are actually quite brilliant.
Okay. So the synchro mysticism is basically applying your knowledge or your way of interpreting what's happening to somebody's real world experiences, whether it's directly from them or it's someone else's or something else's, and how it's been influencing them.
To some degree, I would say synchro mysticism would be more collective than personal.
Okay. Can you say what that means?
Yeah, so for instance, 9/11. 9/11 is a synchromistic event. It has personal impacts on people, obviously, especially if you were there, you were a fireman, and you were inhaling all the chemicals and toxins. That's an immediate event. If you were somebody who lost somebody in the collapse of those buildings, that's an immediate event. But outside of that, it's a collective event. So what does that mean? What was going on at that time, right? Like both astrologically, astrotheologically, what does it relate to? Where does it come from? Is there a pattern there? What does it say about the new century? That's like a synchromistic event.
Okay. So, all right. Yeah. So I'm not going to ask you to sort of plot that all out, because that's probably some of the stuff that you do in your own stuff. But I understand what you mean by that, where you can look at it collectively and do the interpretation or the definition. Very interesting stuff. I do want to go back to something that was a little bit basic, and I'm not sure if this is your thing or not, because what I'm starting to decipher is that, there's deep astrology and there's sort of like commercial astrology. But what is, again, the song, The Dawning of the Age of Aquarius, what does that mean? What's the age of something mean?
So, using like the age of Pisces as a reference point.
Sure.
The age of Pisces is related, theoretically, that's where we are. Again, this precession of the equinoxes, these what I would call galactic years or cosmic years, which would be related to like Yuga cycles. But the age of Aquarius in our time is related to these Abrahamic religions. I'm sorry, age of Pisces, rather. Abrahamic religions. And that the age of Pisces is connected to the most universal Western symbol, which would be the symbol of Jesus, which would be sacrificial, right? Somebody who dies for the sins of others, that there is a redemptive quality to it, that there is this whole idea of life, death, resurrection, of the kingdom of God. But there are other, tributaries that are related to that, right? Even looking at like the clergy, right, with their fish heads, they wear those, the hats that bishops wear, which are essentially like these fish hats, which are representative of the age of Pisces.
Wow.
So we look at Pisces and we look at the literature, we look at the art, we look at something like T.S. Eliot's poem, The Wasteland, which is a modern take on the Fisher King, which is Piscean, and the fall, and the kind of the eternal wound of modern society. And you look at a lot of even something like as mundane as the Omega Man with Charlton Heston. Right? You look at the last scene of the Omega Man, and Charlton Heston is in a Christ pose, and they're taking his blood from him because he has the antibodies to sustain the new race, right? So the age of Pisces is embedded in our psyche. It's embedded in our collective awareness. It's embedded in this idea that there is this archetypal martyr who will die for humanity, but through the death of that martyr, there is eternal life. And even in the Omega Man, that would be a synchronistic moment in the Omega Man, that in cinema, he's dying for the future life of humanity, right? That's what happens. So that's what the age of Pisces is related to. It's our faults, it's our collective, it's our individual weakness that allows us to transcend through sacrifice. And through that sacrifice, we experience something more eternal and more whole. The age of Aquarius, there's a lot of debate about when the age of Aquarius begins, when it began. I have my own thoughts about that. But the age of Aquarius is when we move away from the age of Pisces, because these ages go in reverse. They don't go Pisces to Aries. They go from Pisces to Aquarius, and then Aquarius theoretically to Capricorn. But we're a long, long ways away from that. And the Fifth Dimension sang that song back in the 1960s. And this gets into a much deeper discussion. But when you look at the assassination of JFK, which happens in 1963, to me, that is the JFK, whether you believe he's dead or not. There are a lot of people that don't believe he died. I'm not one of them. But JFK is the Fisher King, right? He is the Fisher King. The United States was, what was it considered? Not Avalon, but
Camelot.
It was, yeah. So it's like Camelot. Thank you. Which is Arthurian, right? Camelot's Arthurian, and Arthur suffers the same wounds as the Fisher King. And he, when he has the wound, Camelot goes into darkness, and crops don't produce. So this is what happens with JFK. He is the Fisher King. So it sends us into, this timeline of darkness. And when you look at what was happening astrologically at that time, Saturn was in the sign of Aquarius. And Aquarius is the symbol of the Aquarian age. So what happens when we come out of that? Well, we don't even really come out of that. What happens on the other side of the death of Kennedy? You have Johnson, who institutes the war on poverty, right? And this whole, the Great Society, which is very Aquarian in its spirit. It's very, we're going to give out, all these stipends, and the welfare state is going to expand, and and then you go into the whole civil rights thing, and everything becomes very Aquarian at that point. And the new leader isn't even really Johnson, although Johnson takes over. Somebody like Martin Luther King becomes a leader, which is very Aquarian. It's a social movement, civil rights, and even Rosa Parks, who is connected to Martin Luther King, is an Aquarian. Right, she gets on the bus that says, sit in the back. Which is, by the way, that's astroturf. That's a different discussion. So we get into this idea of people who become these like global leaders. Even Gandhi kind of falls into that camp a little bit. Then we have this whole idea of MK Ultra and the influence into pop culture with groups like the Beatles, which are group-oriented, group consciousness. Before that, we had these individual people like Buddy Holly. Even though we had a band, it was Buddy Holly and the Crickets. It wasn't John Lennon and the Beatles. You had Elvis Presley, who was individual. You had Jerry Lee Lewis, who was individual. And even somebody like Bill Haley, it was Bill Haley and the Comets. And they all kind of either die or go away, or they get embroiled in legal battles. Chuck Berry goes to prison. And then you have the Beatles who emerge, and this whole idea of the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Who, the Yardbirds. It's not Eric Clapton and Yardbirds. It's all group consciousness. So this idea that the Aquarian age comes into play at this time is significant. And the first Beatles record is released in North America and Canada, I believe, the same day or the week after JFK dies. So it would be in November of 1963. So there's this idea that the Aquarian age and its darkness starts during that time, that we become indoctrinated into this whole idea of this dark Aquarian age. And I think there's some truth to that, although it's not fully fleshed out. So if we fast forward, like where we are now, Saturn and Aquarius, every time you see Saturn and Aquarius, there's some kind of like global activity. The last time Saturn was in Aquarius was when George H.W. Bush was president, and we went to war with Iraq, and the entire world went to war with Iraq. It was called the Coalition of the Willing. We have our first public murmuring to the New World Order with Saturn and Aquarius. So what happens the next time? We go into a global lockdown, and we have Anthony Fauci. We have these figureheads, but they're not figureheads in the political sense. Fauci represents a group. Tedros Adhanom represents a group, right? So Aquarius is about, group consciousness, group think, group ideas. And with, this, Capricorn, which is the sign before Aquarius, you have an individual leader, like a president. Well, now we don't really have that as much anymore, right? We're moving into this whole idea of what we would call a technocracy, much more Aquarian, where there's groupthink, or where there's, well, I don't have the answer to that. The answer to that really came down from, our focus group on health, which is, run here by the hospitals in the area. They're the ones that provided us with the details and the blueprints and how to do this. But there's no one singular person there. There's no one singular person. So there's no one person that takes the success or blame for the success or failure of any project. So we're being moved into this whole idea now, because 2020 was a huge year. It was huge. And every time you go through a decade, especially a zero decade, where there's a new president, it represents a new changing of the tides, where there's a new wave of consciousness, for better or worse. If you just go back and look at Kennedy, who was elected in 1960. And then what happens? We go through the 60s, and it's tumultuous. It's a time of huge change. And we don't get another president that's elected in a 0 year until we get to Reagan. And what happens with Reagan? It's tumultuous, huge change. The Soviet Union falls, theoretically. We have Reaganomics, and that's massive, right? We don't have another president that's elected in a 0 year again until who? Joe Biden. And here we are. Everything is massively changing. Everything is changing.
Well, George Bush was elected in 2000.
That's right. It's another area. My bad. Another area of change. 9/11. My apologies for that. So, but that just proves my point. Every time we get a president in a 0 year, it's massive change. And this one has to do with what I would call the dark Aquarian age, which is really where we are.
Well, interesting. There's a lot there, a lot to consider, a lot to unpack. And I'm looking at the time, and I think that we could never cover it all and do it justice. So I'm sure that that's part of what your courses and your shows deal with. So why don't you tell the folks where they can find you, follow you, support you, find out more about you and your work?
So I have a astrology website. I used to write a lot on it, but I don't so much anymore. But it's there, and if people are interested in getting an astrological reading from me, doing coaching, which I do. I also have a course you can download. That's all there on my website, robertphoenix.com. I do a stream every day on a website called 15 Minutes of Flame. Well, not every day, Monday through Thursday. 15minutesoflame.com. That's ovflame.com. And then on Fridays, I have a YouTube channel called The 11th House. And on Fridays, I do interviews with people on a lot of different topics and subjects. And on that same channel on Sunday nights, I do a 2.5-hour show on astrology. So those are places you can get a hold of me. On Twitter, I'm AstroPhoenix9. On Facebook, I'm Robert Phoenix. And that's it.
Well, fascinating. We may come back to you another time and try to get a little bit more deeper into things as I understand more things. Because I'm the hindrance right now because this is very new to me, but everything's new to somebody at some point. So I thank you for that and trying to take a novice through some of this. And appreciate your time, and everyone check him out. He's very responsive on Twitter, I can assure you of that. And the Phoenix, obviously is something that at its root is sort of optimistic. You sort of rise from the ashes. So there you go. So
that's your bird. You're a Scorpio, Jeff. That's your bird. It's your symbol.
Well, I have on one arm I've got my Scorpio tattooed, and on my other shoulder I've got my Phoenix tattooed. So
there you go. Here's your synchro mysticism.
And you know something? I didn't even know that they were related when I did it. I just sort of put the two things. I sort of have a story across my back, and it seems like maybe that was preordained also. So that's pretty cool.
I enjoyed my time with you, and I thought you asked really good questions.
I appreciate it. I love when guests say that, because I really don't know a lot, but I keep learning things, and I keep seeing the interconnections of things. I'm pretty well read, but in fiction, but like smart fiction. So you don't always get facts, but you get enough things that are facts, or at least factual. But I do appreciate that, because I don't want my guests to think I'm a dummy, and I also want my guests to come back so that when when I know more, I can ask better questions, or at least more pointed questions. Like I said, this was.
No, I think they were great. They were important questions, and they were certainly important for you to be, for you to get a better handle on the subject matter, and also for people who may not really, have the same level of kind of understanding. So they were great. Invite me back anytime. Be happy to be here.
Yeah, definitely will. I definitely will. I thank you so much. Please enjoy the rest of your day and your weekend, and good luck with your stuff. And everyone, check out his stuff. Just rewind about 2 minutes, and you'll have heard where all of his information is, so that you can check him out. All right. Thank you all for listening to the Garden of Doom. Again, please give us 5 stars as a rating, a review. Let your friends know this is sort of a genre-defined show, so we really benefit from personal referrals and recommendations. So as I always think there's something for everybody here in the Garden of Doom. Aquarius sounds a little doomy. It doesn't necessarily need to be, but it sounds a little doomy. So the timing seems to be right there as well. Anyway, thanks everybody for listening, and you will hear us again next week.
Shit left to give. Hella bad legs with tip. Big old bucks for a tip. Bling bling roadie with the wrist. Yeah, 5 new ladies in my DMs. What I do seems like everything I dream of comes true. They are like not for me. They use astrology. Head getting crazy, need to look out to me. Then I took her on a date. Catastrophe. Yeah, I'm sorry that I book's quick. It's not up to me. I got married to the money matrimony. No problem, no problem. Got the keys in the car in the front for the whip in the back. Yeah. Her ass that bar. Have you seen it? No, I haven't. Do you want it? Cause I do. Baby girl, I wanna do. So I think the hook's about to come back on in right now. Shit left to give. Hella bad legs with tip. Big old bucks for a tip. Bling bling roadie with the wrist. Yeah, 5 new ladies in my DMs. What I do seems like everything I dream of comes true. They are like not for me. They use astrology. Where is all my money? In the bank where it should be. Trust me, yeah, I'm good with my money. Stash it all away, I'm baby, no money. Check, 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 my flow out. Check, 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 steady big now. Baby, you so sick, sick, sick. Yeah, I'm running at a beat. Oh shit, shit, shit. Usually I make a bridge right here, but today I wasn't really feeling it. I got shit left to give. Hella bad legs with tip. Big old bucks for a tip. Bling bling roadie with the wrist. Yeah, 5 new ladies in my DMs. What I do seems like everything I dream of comes true. They are like not for me. They use astrology. I'ma do it live, 5 alive, pull up money, let me die, pepper fit, 30 yeah, even if you 40, I'ma fly out, LAX, do a couple shows for a couple chicks, man, I really think I fucking next.